Let's see. Next up, we have tolerant Islam as a social and geopolitical weapon.
And this is just more of the same. That in the 19th century, I mentioned earlier that the Ottomans allied with the British and French, and this is when they abolished the jizya. But this was also the time when the British and French governments actually, because they wanted to justify going to war, allied with the Ottoman Empire against Russia, which was Christian as they were. They started to talk about how Islam was tolerant and wonderful. And the Islam is a religion of peace nonsense really started in the mid 19th century to justify the Crimean War and to give them an excuse because the people in those days, people knew. And so the British and French populations were enraged that the leaders of Britain and France would actually ally with the Ottoman Empire. And so they ran this publicity campaign to say, oh, really, Islam's wonderful. It's peace. And so it's not a bad thing to ally with the Ottomans. The people knew better. They remembered it was within living memory. You know, their grandparents, their great grandparents had fought in wars against the jihadis. But now the geopolitical situation was changing.
I have to say, I think that's the reason some Eastern European countries like Poland and so on aren't as friendly towards Islam as they still remember. Even though
Mm-hmm.
it's more distant now than it was back then, but they still remember the people who stood up against Islam. They still remember like the constant, endless invasions by the Ottomans and stuff, and so they don't. They're not as gullible as like Great Britain and so on.
Yeah. Well, you know, Jan Sobieski is a hero still in Poland, modern day Poland. And so people more generally have an idea of what he's a hero for than anybody remembers over in England or France.
Mhm.
And so I've got a few others examples of that in this book. One of the most interesting things is that one of the greatest scholars of Hadith, Ignaz Goldziher, a Jewish scholar, he actually is a tremendous resource if you want to study the Hadith in depth and understand the. That's actually not true. I'm sorry. A comment caught my eye, and a lot of people say nasty stuff in the comments, and it's not worth noting. But somebody
What?
says
Want me to
this is
destroy
just
someone?
more,
No, sorry.
no, this is just more of the same. Robert Spencer about his own book. No, that's not. This
Who said
book
that?
is completely different.
Yeah, I'm saying no. I'm
Songs
saying
of
no.
Relief. Absolutely. This book is stuff that has never been said before, not just by me, but by anyone. And this is a whole different line of inquiry. People might say that
No, that's not
it's
that's not
all
so-
about Islam, but
yeah,
that doesn't make it the same as the others.
yeah, no, that's not Songs of Relief saying this is more of the same. It's quoting you saying apparently you said this is just more of the same. Robert
Yeah, but
Spencer
I'm
about
not
his own book.
talking about the
Yeah,
book.
yeah, he's not talking about
I'm not
his book there,
talking.
guys. Yeah, because no, this is new stuff, guys.
I don't know in what connection I said that. I don't have everything I said
Yeah, you were talking
memorized,
about something
but
specific.
yes. But I get that a lot. You know, people say, how is this book different from the other book? And I'm always happy to answer the question. But you should just know in general, I've written 32 books and they're all different. That publishers don't like it when you give them the same thing that's already out. Every one of them is different from the others. But anyway, Goldziher was entranced with Islam. And it's interesting because he's a very realistic and sober critic of the Hadith. And I know, David, you know, I know that we disagree on this, but a lot of the skepticism about the historicity of the Hadith, it doesn't come from modern day people. It comes from Goldziher, who died in, I believe it was 1921. And he speaks about them in great depth. But he also, oddly enough, he speaks about having his greatest religious experience in a mosque in Egypt, and that he felt never closer to God than there. And he never converted to Islam, but he sort of foreshadowed this idea of all of these Abrahamic religions being um, pathways to God on their own, all that sort of nonsense. But nevertheless, a great scholar in his work. This his personal life and his experience in Egypt is another thing.
Uh, and after that, we get to some chapters which are what I was bringing up earlier with how Islam has done so many great things and actually does work. So, chapter 10 is the Al Andalus of our dreams. I'm guessing that's about the Andalusian paradise where
Oh yeah,
Muslims, Christians, and Jews all live together in a state of perfect harmony with Muslims in charge. And when Muslims are in charge, everything works out well.
yep. And this is just flat ahistorical nonsense. People who say Andalus, Al Andalus, was some paradise of multiculturalism, are working from a fantasy, which is why isn't that the chapter title there? The Al Andalus of our dreams. It's just a dream. The real Al Andalus, from contemporary records, was a brutal place where the Jews and Christians were denied basic rights, lived as dhimmis. It was a big slave area, a slave market for the whole Islamic world, and that's because there were a lot of non-Muslims around who could be enslaved. It was, and I've got all the goods right in here, and so it was non-Muslims, particularly a historian, the late Maria Rosa Menocal, who wrote *The Ornament of the World*, who popularized this idea not long after 9/11, if I recall correctly, who were saying that this is some Islamic golden age. And the whole idea is not to talk about Al Andalus at all. You understand? They're not really wanting to tell you anything about Al Andalus. What they want to do is make you think, oh, all these Muslims are coming into our countries now, and that's just great. It'll be like Al Andalus. Well, it will be like Al Andalus, but Al Andalus is not like what you think. It was a much more uncomfortable place for non Muslims than that.
And this is the one of the sad things about people, one, not remembering history, and you can't blame people for not remembering things that far back and so on, but that they won't learn it. The problem with people not learning their history, even when history is being completely misrepresented, is if you don't learn it and learn how to respond to it and learn what the reality is, then that allows the Muslim Dawa clown and the various spokesmen and so on to say whatever they want because they know they're
Yep.
operating in an atmosphere of ignorance and allows them to say whatever they want. And this was the golden age, guys. This was the golden age. Wouldn't it be great to go back to the golden age? You like golden ages, don't you? I like golden ages. Let's go back to the golden age where Muslims are in charge. See, it'll be better.
Oh, yeah. Well, the historical ignorance is really a massive problem in this, because in the Islamic world they don't actually have that historical ignorance, and there's a much larger general understanding of history, of course, from the Islamic perspective, and then they can just lie like dogs to the Americans and Europeans, and the Americans and Europeans don't know any better, and then there's so many Americans and Europeans who join in the lies, and that's the next chapter.
Oh, nope, that's a little farther down. So we've got we already talked a little bit about they invented science. That's chapter 11.
Yeah,
So, and then
this is
and
a
then
particular thing. I take on this TikToker. I know it's kind of crazy. I probably should have made a video, but anyway, this TikTok guy made a video. Which religion brought more to Western civilization, Christianity and Islam, or Islam? He's an American non-Muslim, and it's just a symptom of the problem we're dealing with, that he thinks all these falsehoods, and so I take him on in this. And then we have, yes, chapter 12.
the fictional palace of Islamic achievements.
And there we go. That's, you referred to that before. I think that's the 1001 Inventions
Hmm.
chapter. They are in here somewhere. Yeah. 1001 Inventions is on page 137. And you understand, when they see, uh, when they make these things up, rather. And when they say stuff like they invented airplanes because some guy strapped wings on his back and jumped off a cliff, then it just leads to another question. And the other question is, why didn't you do anything with it? If he really invented flight, how come it was left to a couple of guys in North Carolina in 1903 to actually get a flying machine going? Why didn't you guys do it? If they if they really I've seen there's another one that's in here somewhere. Copernicus, isn't he the guy who discovered that the Earth goes around the sun and not the other way around? And so I've seen people say, "Oh, but it was actually all so and so 100 years before Copernicus." Okay, but the Europeans took that and ran with it, and all sorts of discoveries of modern science and astronomy, not astrology, come from that. So why didn't you guys do anything with it? It was left to a European to do something with it, a non-Muslim. Why? If you invented everything, why was it always left to the non-Muslims to make something of it?
Yeah, everyone, here's the actual reality of how this would work. Islam is based on going out and conquering and taking over other areas and taking over other people's stuff. As they would go out, as Muslim armies would go out, they would take over an area, and then they would suddenly have access to those people's books and so on. And this kind of took off in two areas, in science and in philosophy. So what would happen is you'd have all these books of the kuffar. Now all of a sudden you have access to the books of the kuffar. The, let's say, philosophers who, among the Muslims now who are interested in studying philosophy would have to go get permission of the caliph. And they would go before the caliph and say, can we examine these books to find out what use they can be for Islam? And they would get permission. Well, then you'd have a brief period of actual advancements. You'd have to start having Muslim philosophers and so on. You start having Muslims work on science. But it wouldn't take long before the religious leaders to realize, these guys are coming up with some ideas and some theories and views and stuff that are conflicting with the Quran and so on. And then they'd have a problem with it, and Islam would suffocate it. So Robert's pointing out, like, why doesn't any of this philosophy, science, medical research, mathematics, why doesn't it last in Islam? You have brief periods where it takes off for a while and then Islam suffocates it. How is that supposed to impress us about Islam? Islam isn't what produced it. Islam is what suffocated it and kept it from taking off. So what does this have to do with Islam? We can't figure it out.
That's another point, actually, that the great philosophers, people say, I see it all the time. Oh, you owe your whole thought, your whole philosophical foundations of the Western world to
Averroes and Avicenna and Ghazali.
Yeah. Well, yeah. Okay, great. Even if you grant that, although it's wildly overstated, even if you grant that, then you got a problem. Because the last guy you mentioned, Al-Ghazali, said the other guys were heretics. Because what they were saying was there was a dual truth, that there was the truth of the Quran and the truth of philosophy. And Al-Ghazali said, quite rightly, that makes no sense. There's only one truth. And you guys are heretics and should be killed. It's on the last page of The Incoherence of the Philosophers. The philosophers are heretics and should be killed. How come you don't have great Islamic philosophers after Averroes and Avicenna and all those guys? Because of Al-Ghazali saying they should all be killed. And this happened in all manner of endeavors.
Mm-hmm. All right. Well, next up we have adopting Islamic grievances.
Now, see, this is more stupid infidel. That if you believe that these people are noble, the noble victims of colonialism and so on, and that they had this superior civilization and they have this superior religion of tolerance and peace, then you're more likely to adopt their causes. And we see this last couple of years with all these leftists joining the jihad against Israel and identifying with Hamas and so on. And so that's what that chapter is all about.
And then we've got Jewish Voices for Jihad. Oh, this is horrible, man.
Same thing, that you have these people, this noble group of people with this wonderful religion, and they've been mistreated by the terrible Westerners who were inferior in every way. And so, even the Jews who were called the worst enemies of the Muslims in the Quran itself, leftist Jews are identifying with the Muslims, with Islam, and with the jihad against Israel.
Yeah,
And
if
so this is the failure and excuses business. This is the outcome of making the excuses for the Muslims. Then you begin to identify them. And, it's not their fault. Everything they've done is right. And so you might as well just join forces with them. And here we see it happening all the time now.
And yeah, if the Quranic revelation had not ceased with Muhammad and had he'd continued receiving revelations, then Surah 5 verse 82 would now say, "Verily, you will find most vehement in hostility towards the believers to be the polytheist and the Jews, although you will find many useful idiots among the Jews." Something along those lines.
Yes, absolutely.
And then we have fabricated Muslims. Who's fabricating Muslims?
The Muslims and non-Muslims are joining together. This is the other side of thinking that this is this wonderful, noble uh, culture that's been victimized by the West. That there are all the great heroes of the West were actually Muslims, and we don't know it. It's been covered up by the wicked non-believers. And so, an Iranian cleric, actually the grandson of the Iranian cleric, the Ayatollah Hossein Borujerdi, he claimed in 2012 that Albert Einstein had admitted Shia Islam was the most scientific and just religion in the world. Albert Einstein, David,
Well, that's
he
good
was a
news for the
Shiite.
that's good news for the new Ayatollah. They should have no problem taking over the world with the super advanced science.
Yeah, and you see how pathetic this is that
It's bad.
non-Muslims actually take this up. We'll get to some of them here. Let's see what we got after Einstein. Um, Leonardo da Vinci was a Muslim. These are Muslims saying these so far. Um,
I've heard Neil Armstrong. I've heard a bunch of these
yeah,
guys.
Neil Armstrong is here, and let's see. And then they're just totally fake stories like Jacques Cousteau became a Muslim. Of course, you hear the stories all about how Thomas Jefferson admired Islam, and that's because he had a Quran. He had a Quran because he's fighting a war against people who said we're doing this because of Islam. But they never say that. They act like he's some sort of proto Muslim. And Morgan Freeman is supposed to have converted to Islam. Um, this fictional person, John Ford, this was an internet meme. Allahu Akbar. John Ford, the richest man in the world, owns 190 American channels. He declared his conversion to Islam and cried while pronouncing the Shahada. There is no such person. Nobody's ever
Wait a minute. You're
found
saying
such a
there's
person.
no one named John Ford?
Yeah,
John
no,
Ford.
not the richest man in the
Okay.
world.
John Ford Musk.
Yep. And so then I go into in 16 a retrograde force,
That's
have
Churchill there.
some of the actual things that happen, not these fake converts, but real converts. And the retrograde force quote comes, of course, from Winston Churchill saying that how dreadful are the curses which Mohammedanism lays on its votaries, besides the fanatical frenzy which is as dangerous in a man as hydrophobia in a dog. There is this fearful fatalistic apathy, and so on and so on. And so then you get real converts to Islam, not the Neil Armstrong and Albert Einstein type. You get John Walker Lind, who, you were talking about that we were talking earlier about how Muslim countries don't have problems with illegal immigration. You know, nobody's sneaking into Afghanistan. Nobody wants to be there. But John Walker Lynn, the Marin County Mujahid, the kid who was he was a kid in California who converted to Islam and was later arrested. He was fighting alongside Al Qaeda and the Taliban against American troops. He actually he got his parents to agree he was going to go and live in Yemen so he could study Arabic. And I think he must have been the only guy in the last century who has gone voluntarily to live in Yemen.
Yeah. Even if, God forbid, I were to convert to Islam, would not be going to Yemen for any reason ever.
And then he went from Yemen to Afghanistan. So
Oh my
the guy,
goodness.
he had all kinds of opportunity to see that he'd made a wrong choice, but he didn't put it together. Anyway, I got a lot of stories here of converts to Islam who become terrorists. And the reason why these stories are important and why I tell so many of them is because I want to emphasize the difference. There are converts to Christianity all over the place. And how many of them become terrorists? Can you think of any converts to Christianity who have ever committed an act of violence and said, I did this because I read my holy book? I cannot think of any such incident. And yet there is incident after incident of these Americans and others converting to Islam and joining terror groups. And there's the story I like to tell of Mohammed Reza Takari Azhar. You remember him, David? He was in University of North Carolina in Chapel Hill in 2006. He was an Iranian. He was not an observant Muslim. He was a Muslim background, but he was a party boy. He was just getting drunk and such, college kid. And then he decided that he was wasting his life and that he was going to recover his religion. So he started to study the Quran, and he ultimately rented an SUV and tried to run over as many of the children on campus as he could. Because he read in the Quran that he had to wage jihad against unbelievers. And he wrote detailed letters to the campus paper quoting the Quran, saying he'd studied it, and these were all the verses where he was commanded to wage jihad. Now, there is just no comparable person to that in the Christian tradition. And that is a remarkable thing because there's so many converts to Islam or Muslims who are not devout and then become devout, who turn to violence. And yet nobody seems to put two and two together here.
Yeah. Weird.
You'd think they would.
Mm-hmm. At least after the first 1,000 examples.
Indeed. And so that's basically it. I go at some length about the individual converts to make that point, and also just to show, as I said at the beginning, Islam is bad for societies and bad for individuals. It destroys societies, makes them parasitical, and ultimately kills them off. And it ruins the lives of individuals by making them think that to do evil is good.
And kind of seems demonic to me, Robert, I have to say. Seems
I don't
demonic.
have any doubt about that.
Yep.
Absolutely.
Teaches people to hate and destroy and grape and everything else, and then teaches you all that the more you do it, the better you are with God, and then you spend eternity doing all this stuff, and it's like yeah, rough stuff. And the sad part is, it convinces people who want to follow God that this is true, right? It says, oh, you really want to follow God? Here, be as sick and twisted as possible. And that'll help you spend eternity deflowering prepubescent girls.